I've been looking forward to this one, visiting with old friend Dan Endy tonight on the SOUHAN-UNFILTERED podcast. You can find this and all the podcasts at SOUHANUnfiltered.com. I've had a bunch of great guests. I've gotten to revisit a lot of old friends doing this. It's been a great experience as part of the Live and Social Network. I never thought, a few months ago, Dan, I had no idea I'd ever do a podcast. Now I'm enjoying it more than I think I've done any other kind of broadcast venue. This, again, is the Live and Social Network. We are live from O'Gara's Bar in St. Paul. Just go south on Snelling from 94, and you find the great old family-run Irish pub. My band played here last Friday. My band will be playing here again next Friday. Usually I do the podcast Friday evenings from O'Gara's. Sometimes my band will play, and then from 9 o'clock till midnight, we have live karaoke at O'Gara's with the live karaoke band La Bang, which is a lot of fun. Last weekend, Danny, a couple of members of my family turned 21 recently. So
nice.
That was kind of their ability to actually have a drink with Dad
legally
in a public spot legally.
Yeah.
Yes, legally is the key.
Yes.
This is not Wisconsin. You actually have to be 21 to drink in this state. But let's get to it. Dan Endy, my guest. And I got to know Dan when I first moved to town in 1990 to cover the Minnesota Vikings. I came here from Dallas. Dan was the director of communications. Did I get that right?
Yep.
But the first topic I want to talk to you about, Dan, we're going to get some old Vikings stories. I'm interested in your view, the way the media's changed, the way the Vikings have changed, the way the NFL's changed. But let's start here. Earlier this week, I wrote about Ed Sabol's death at the age of 98. Legendary figure credited with creating and popularizing NFL films, which in turn helped popularize the NFL, helped turn the NFL what it has turned into today. I wrote about that, and then you and I corresponded, and you reminded me that your father played a significant role in NFL films, and that's what I want to get to first. I'm going to leave it open to you. Just tell me the story.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of be my dad's PR guy, because it's really something that his kids and my mom don't necessarily feel he's done well, but he's humble, and that's the way he is. But yeah, as I understand, and again, I was young, moved to Minnesota when I was 9, so this was all.
Where'd you move from?
From Philadelphia,
okay.
So all the memories are pre-9-year-old memories. But I know that, my father, when he finished college out at UC Riverside, he was working for a little company called Telra Films in Philadelphia. Their big customer was Miller Brewery, and they did, he did sports productions for Miller High Life. I can still remember we had a cool Miller High Life animated, not a clock, but some kind of a wall thing that lit up, and it was a Miller High Life
mirror?
Yeah, it was like, yes, thank you.
And I remember, that's what I remember about growing up, is everybody had a basement bar.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody had Miller or whatever the local beer was. They had the light-up mirrors in the basement. Yeah. That's how we spent our nights.
Dad was working for a company called Telra Films, and he knew of Ed Sabol. As you wrote about, Ed had kind of dropped out of life and wanted to do something new and had a camera, and he started playing around with it. So somehow the two knew one another, and at some point they kind of, I don't think there was necessarily a partnership, but they started working together. They each ponied up some money and went to Pete Rozelle and got the rights to what became the film became the longest day in football. I want to say it was the Packers at the Giants at like Yankee Shea Stadium, some kind of, and that apparently went well. They continued to work together, and NFL Films was kind of born. The Sabols, their version of the story is that father and son formed the company. Well, at the time that Dad and Ed started working together, Steve was not there for 2 years. Mm-hmm. He was still finishing school at Colorado College. So how it became father and son versus my dad and Ed, that again, they're great storytellers. There's no denying that. You wrote that, and it's been written the New York Times obit. I mean, that's their legacy was great storytellers. We just kind of feel like maybe they left a little piece of it out. But they were working together. As I say, they got Pete Rozelle, and I'm not sure that NFL Films per se really started. Until that the NFL bought NFL Films. I don't think that happened until after the first year of Monday Night Football with Howard Cosell reading the halftime highlights that they had done. And, but as I said, I called my mom for some stories. I had heard growing up that my dad he was certainly there when they started things like super slow motion, when they put microphones on coaches, put them on players. That in today's NFL film story, that was very much the Sabols. Mm-hmm. That's not, we think that Dad was far more involved in some of that, and that was part of their allure, I think, with their early filmmaking. But they were doing some productions and traveling. I think I can't remember if you wrote or if it was the Times obit, that they were traveling and showing him to clubs and association meetings. And the NFL at the time was probably at that time, maybe the third most popular. I mean, there was boxing,
baseball,
horse racing,
college football, and then I think the NFL maybe came in after that.
Yeah, so that it was, it wasn't the behemoth that it is today. I guess maybe they have people like you, the ink-stained wretches, over however, how many years have you been doing it?
I've been running sports for 35 years. I thought about that the other day. I've been at Strib for 25 now.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, but back then it was, like you say, so it was fifth, and I clearly they're number one, and I think that NFL Films and their, when they got purchased by the NFL, they were a phenomenal PR machine for the league. Still are.
Oh yeah.
And it's just as a son, I'm proud of my dad's role. I wish that more people knew about it. And when I wrote to you, I wasn't. There was more jest than seriousness. I just want.
But there is truth and humor.
Well, it was. So when I called my mom and said, well, give me some stories to tell, and she said that they went to Ed's. Ed was a creative guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no question about that. He was kind of a creative. Free thinker. Their kitchen was nothing but vending machines.
Really?
It was all vending machines, and his wife at the time said that, and this was her quote, was that a kitchen should be nothing more than a walk through to the garage. He had an electric chair in the house. I didn't ask if it was a working electric chair, but clearly he was a creative, engaging fella, and they did then and still do phenomenal work.
So what do you think happened? What's your understanding of what happened? Did your dad stay in the company and just not get a lot of credit? Was he elbowed out of the financial gains? What was the dynamic?
I think that once Steve finished school, he got more involved, and I think maybe Dad was kind of slightly elbowed out. I mean, one of the things my mom did say is at the time that Dad and Ed were working, Ed wouldn't have been able to splice film together. Dad was really doing the production, the script writing, the editing. Ed may have been selling the story and the chutzpah or the theatrics, but Dad was doing most of the work. When Steve finished school, I think that was where his interest lied. That was what he was interested in. That's what he was interested in, and I think kind of got elbowed out, and There was a company out here in Minneapolis doing similar things at the time, doing highlight films for the Gopher football, basketball, and hockey. They did the original Bob Lurtsema commercials for TCF that were on for years and years and years.
So I need to blame you for Bob Lurtsema's popularity, basically.
I mean, well, you could blame my dad, because the story always was that TCF had identified that they wanted a bench warmer, and it had come down to Bob Lurtsema or a player by the name of Godfrey Zonbrecker, a true Viking. Dad picked Lurtsema, and maybe the following week, Godfrey Zonbrecker was cut.
Wow.
Now, whether it was a week but he made Bob Lurtsema. There wouldn't be a Bob Lurtsema's restaurant. Actually, I don't know if that still exists.
I don't think I've eaten there, and
okay.
it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
And I'm just glad I'm still alive to tell that story.
But Bob, the Viking Update, Bob Lurtsema.
Yeah.
I mean, he made. I mean, that was Bob. He nursed or milked that legend for a long, long time.
Still is.
Yeah.
It is amazing. Viking Update's doing pretty well, I believe.
Well, that's probably because of I mean, they've got some players that are pretty exciting now, and but when Dad and Ed, I mean, they did some. I remember. I remember my dad's involvement in film. I want to say when I was 4 and I had an older sister who was 6, Dad was filming the Army-Navy game at Franklin Field. And he brought the two of us and stuck us with strangers in seats. Now, this would never happen today. Just ask some elderly woman, would you watch my kids? I'm going to be up on the top of the press box filming the game. And she watched us probably like we were her own grandchildren. I was at that infamous Eagles game when this Santa came out in the sleigh and was pelted with.
Yes.
I remember sitting with my mom and being aghast, like watching the snowballs come, and he maybe got 20 yards out of the tunnel and turned around and went back. You hear stories about. I was at that game. Truly was at that game, but. I got a chance to see a lot of sporting events up close, whether it was Dad's involvement with NFL Films or when we were out here. I was, schlepping film for him for Gopher football, basketball. Sat up in the perch at the old Mariucci Arena right behind the goal. Spent a lot of time at sporting events and didn't have to pay for very many of them.
In a brutally honest moment, would your dad say that he is bitter or disappointed with how things turned out?
I would say it probably just turned out the way it was supposed to turn out. He's not, if you do know my dad, there's really not a bitter bone in his body that I've ever seen. And, I was telling you off air that there was my mom and dad had gone out to the Super Bowl. It was whatever Super Bowl in San Diego that Doug Williams was. I forget who they beat, but she remembered. Doug Williams was
Broncos, I believe.
Oh, yes, you're right. He beat Elway.
Yep.
And so NFL Films the night before, the Sabols would throw a big dinner, kind of a preparation, yay rah rah. We've got a lot of work to do tomorrow. They would have hundreds of people there, or 100 people there, from photographers, editors, all kinds of, help. And it was in a hotel ballroom, and he brought my dad up and introduced him to, the folks assembled there as one of the founders. I know that meant a lot to both my mom and my dad, that there was kind of a quasi-public acknowledgement that, that Ed and Steve knew, he really was more than just a peripheral participant. He was one of the founders. Publicly, that never has quite happened, but I think my dad would just say that's okay. That's the way it's. It is what it is, and you can't look back. And I'm fairly certain he's enjoyed his time out here, and I know that he was sad when Steve died, and probably a little sad to see Ed go at 98. Probably envious that he lived to be 98. But I don't think bitter would be my dad.
So when your dad is called up by the Sabols at that party in San Diego, the Sabols didn't just hand him a check for $20 million or anything, did they?
I really, really wish they would have. If they did, we've not heard. I'll have to make a note to call him and find out. But yeah, no. And you know, selfishly for my parents' sake, that's the piece that, you know, geez, when that thing exploded and it became a household name, I would have loved for my dad and mom to have been able to participate in some of that wealth.
Right.
I assumed wealth, but you know, they're okay.
Yeah. And so how did you get involved in pro sports?
Through my dad. True story, I was a senior at the U, floundering. And the team was moving from Met Stadium to the Metrodome. And my dad had been doing, as you know, he still does defensive stats in the press box on game day. So he knew the PR director. At that time, my brother and I were press box runners at Met Stadium, handing sandwiches to Dick Cullum. You've probably heard stories, but
yes.
To Sid, to Patrick, you know, we were handing out sandwiches, and we were actually making, you know, play-by-play copies on a mimeograph in a back room, getting higher than a kite from the fumes in this closed room running Anyway, the team was moving from outdoors to indoors. My dad called and asked Merrill Swanson at the time, the PR director, you know, are you going to need any help? And Merrill said, you know, absolutely. He said, you know, I've got a son that's a senior, kind of a communications major, not done. Merrill said, you know, we have an internship. Why don't you have him give me a call? So I was, that particular quarter, I wasn't in school. I was working at a sporting goods store, pulling like fishing lures off of a shelf and stuffing them in a basket. My dad called, and he'd never called me at work. And I thought something had happened, somebody died, and he's like, I got a job for you, you know, call this number. And, you know, the next day I called Merrill, went out, had a quick little interview. He knew me from the 3 years of work, and I started as an intern in 82. 82 was a strike season, so I got to work like 9 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and they went on strike for 9. So Mike Lynn felt guilty and said, you know, why don't you come back next summer? So I came back and interned again. That was 83. Then Bud quits. So now they're going to training camp in 84 with Les Steckel and a whole new coaching staff, and they're like, maybe you could come back and give us one more year. So I still haven't finished school, but I'm paying bills now and out and enjoying it. And so then Bud quits, and I think by then Mike must have felt sorry for me. They hired me at the whopping salary of $12,000 a year. But you know, it was a lot of fun. And it's a different lifestyle. I know that back then there was an off season. Mm-hmm. I mean, podcasts, you know, the way it's changed now, there is no off season for those front office guys, and I sometimes feel sorry for them because. Yeah. You know, I used to be able to tell my wife, I'll make up for it in the off season when you're going. I mean, you know, when you're going on the road and you're gone for a month at training camp or 5 weeks. It was a lot longer then.
Sometimes it was 7 weeks, I think.
Yeah, it was. We had some long training camps, and but nowadays there is no off season. I know Bob Hagan was up at Arctic Blast last weekend. He's got to go to owners meetings. He's got to go to the combine. These are things that I, never had to do. Mm-hmm. Now you've got OTAs. We had 3 days of mini camp, and then there would be off for basically 6 weeks until we'd go to training camp. And so there was a lot of time where you could kind of be with your family and. Well, you know better than me because you're still doing it. There is no down season. They're still talking Vikings just about every day on the radio.
Absolutely, and I do too.
Yeah,
because it's fascinating. And the NFL, go back to the NFL films and everything else. The NFL slowly figured out how to dominate the calendar year round.
Yeah,
and they're brilliant at it.
It's genius marketing.
It really is. Well, let me put you on the spot in that regard. What was it like for a former communications director who worked for the Vikings to watch the Vikings go through the whole Adrian Peterson scenario and struggle to deal with it publicly for a week there?
It was, full disclosure, and the current PR director I hired.
Right.
So I hired Bob Hagan. I mostly felt protective of Bob and Tom West, and just I can't imagine how much work and how many different people were reaching out for either time with Adrian, time with Rick Spielman or whomever. The whole incident with Adrian, I think it was terribly, terribly unfortunate, and but from a fan standpoint, when he's going to play, he's not going to play. I'm sure that maybe they wish they could have had a mulligan around that particular day. But the suspension has felt a little harsh to me. Especially when you compare it with Ray Rice and some of the others. It just, I think more than anything, the league has blundered a couple of times this year, and I'm not alone in that, thinking that whether it's the league or Roger Goodell, that they've goofed a few things up and probably would just as soon this season be over. And then they had Deflategate at the Super Bowl, which part of me thinks that whole thing was contrived just to keep the buzz going for that week, because that's it can sometimes be hard to fill that week.
I actually think, I know the reporter who wrote the story, and he has good sources with the Colts. If anybody invented anything, it was the Colts. But the Colts linebacker intercepts that pass. It feels funny to him. They measure it, and it's deflated. Yeah. And then later, and it's become a very muddy story now. Some people are reporting that 11 of the 12 balls were definitely deflated. Yeah. Other reports now are that maybe one is severely deflated and 10 others were slightly. It's gotten very convoluted. But there's something there. Yeah. There's something there.
Well, I mean, especially when they were trotting out the stat about how less New England fumbled than any other team,
even playing outside in bad weather.
Yeah. How about, just out of curiosity, what are your thoughts on the fiasco with the Beast and his Tuesday press conference? What do you think the league should do, or what do you, because that was a sham or a joke, or
it was a sham.
It was don't even bring him out. I mean, if that's fine him, but I mean, if you're the commissioner for the day, what would you do?
I really don't. First of all, I answered this question not because I really have a whole lot of interest in the story, but just because people ask me. I think the league, and I'm very critical of Roger Goodell and the way he handles a lot of things. I think the league did all it can do.
Yeah.
You fine him. That's all you can do. And Lynch tried to have it both ways. He tried to not answer questions and not be cooperative while showing up so as not to get fined.
Yeah.
I think the league should just fine him, because you don't, you don't want to have that affect the outcome of any games. You don't.
No.
It's not that important. I don't really care whether Marshawn Lynch speaks. It just doesn't matter to me at all. But if you're the league, you should care. And if you're your league, and this is your great PR moment and your opportunity to have people talking about your league, you don't want them all talking about a star player doesn't talk. It's self-defeating. So I think the league is doing it the right way. You fine them, and then you hope the story goes away, and you hope the Seahawks don't go back to Super Bowls. You have to do it again. But once you start talking about it, once you start applying logic to the situation, then you get into thinking more deeply about it, and that's where you can get your back up a little bit, because you say, here's my line on it. NFL players are not paid a lot of money because they're good at what they do. There are a lot of people in the world who are good at what they do and don't make much money.
Yeah.
You can be a great director of communications and you're not going to make $1 million.
Right.
You can be a great podcast website owner and you're not going to make $1 million. NFL players
talking about
get
you.
paid because people are so passionately interested in what they do. That is where the money lies, because they produce high ticket prices, because they produce ratings, especially ratings more than anything else, which turns into billion-dollar TV contracts, which is how the players get paid. So I don't care about it a lot, but once you start talking about it, that has to be the end point, which is Marshawn Lynch is basically telling all the people who are paying him millions of dollars to get screwed.
Yeah. That's it. Would there be any benefit if the fine were significantly more? 500. I mean, because a 10,000 or 20,000 or 50, it's nothing.
That's what I would do.
If it's $500,000 or $1 million,
right? I think that's all they can do, because I wouldn't want to see it cross over into affecting how the team performs. But you can fine them as much as you want; it wouldn't bother me.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break here to run a promotion for Rusty Gatenby's show on the Alive and Social Network. We have Jeff DeBay, we have Rusty Gatenby, we have some new people who are being recruited into the podcast network. We have Julius Collins doing a show with Sean Bernard now. A lot of cool shows on the network. This is one of them.
Do you have a show too? What do you? Okay. And your dad has a show. Okay, that's your uncle. Okay.
This is SOUHAN-UNFILTERED.com. We are live at O'Gara's Bar and Grill, Snelling by 94 in St. Paul. Come by, have a beer. Next Friday night, we'll be doing the podcast probably about 5 o'clock again, and then my band will be playing in the Shanty, which formerly the Garage, and then we will have live karaoke after my band plays about 9. So my band will probably play like 7:45 to 8:45, short set next week, because the bass player is going to be running late, but then live karaoke 9 to midnight.
You're really diversifying here, aren't you? You went from, podcast, band, musician, writer.
When you can't do anything particularly well, you have to do a lot of things. Yeah. Is mediocrity a word? Mediocrely a word? Something like that. Yeah. If you can't be good, be diverse is my view. That's Dan Endy, by the way.
Do you play your own music? Or
no.
Covers.
No, it's cover stuff. Okay. It's covers. I've tried to write songs. I don't think I'm very good at it. I might try again someday, but frankly, for what we want to do, we just like playing. We like playing stuff that other people are going to like. I know a lot of real musicians, and it is quite a battle to produce original music and get anybody to listen to it.
Yeah.
We're all just we just like playing cover stuff and having fun. Drinking music is what we like playing.
I love it.
That's Dan Endy, former communications director with the Minnesota Vikings. We were talking in the first half of the show about his father, also Dan, who played a major role in the popularity of the NFL. I almost said NFL Network and NFL Films. Let's go to story time now, because again, I came to town in 1990. You were working for the Vikings.
Yep.
We had access to some of the great characters in Minnesota sports history. Who's your favorite of all those guys?
Keith Millard.
Really?
Yeah.
Sansevier was telling me that the other day. He just thought he was a great character.
Was he gone by?
I covered him, I think, either 1 or 2 years.
Okay. No, he was you remember him being a combustible personality.
Oh, yeah.
So my role at the time was to be a liaison. So if you came to me and said, here's the guys I want to talk to, I would go then talk to the player. And it would basically, all that was really doing is giving them the out, a way to say no. I would come back, they've got a quarterback meeting.
Right.
But if you remember him, I never even needed to go to him. You could look across the locker room on any given day, and kind of say, we're not going to get him today. He stuffed me in a trash can once.
Did he?
Yeah. I mean, jokingly, but, you know, they were all fairly big. There were some lesser-known guys that I really remember. Charlie Johnson, who they got from the Philadelphia Eagles.
Vaguely.
He was he was a cool guy. The people that I remember the most were like Darren Nelson and Steve Jordan, because they were drafted the same year that I started. So I kind of always was like I was the same class as the two of them, and they roomed together. I loved spending, hanging out in the locker room with Wade Wilson, or I actually, really liked Tommy Kramer, and I think, when people would ask me what kind of guy he was, I would always say, I don't think any player understood his role relative to you, the media, as well as he did. Lots of players would kind of complain and moan, and while we were there, they had started the Wednesday conference call with the visiting media, he was always being asked and probably never wanted to do it, but did it anyway. Subsequent guys, when it was Wade or when it was Rich Gannon or Sean Salisbury, not only did they not want to do it, they wouldn't do it. Tommy got it. He got that, I'm the starting quarterback, I'm the face of the franchise, I'll do this. Anthony Carter was he was hard to get to know. Remember DJ Dozier?
Yes.
I mean, first round draft choice. Everyone thought, he was just going to be.
He caused the Herschel Walker trade.
Well, I never met. I mean, I never met a player who's had less affect than DJ Dozier. I mean, was really hard to read. Just almost like he was two-dimensional. And you're probably right. Because he didn't pan out the way they'd hoped.
First round draft pick at running back.
Yeah,
he was supposed to be the guy who prevented you from trading for Herschel.
A guy who could catch the ball,
Yeah.
have a little more power than Darren Nelson. He allegedly was going to make Darren expendable, which was why he was in that trade. You can't. My time there, really, the most. The biggest personality was obviously Mike Lynn.
Yes.
And maybe
You're still recovering from secondhand smoke, aren't you?
But for all of Mike's faults, and there were probably many, he created a family environment for people like me. When he found out my wife and I were having twins, I was at PR meetings in Tampa. And he called Jeff Diamond, had him get me out of the meetings and come on the phone. And he said, I hear you. He called himself, as you know, Big Daddy. He says, hey, Big Daddy understands you're having twins. Yeah.
He called himself Big Daddy.
Yeah,
I love that.
And he said, I'm not paying you enough to have twins. I'm going to give you a $10,000 raise.
Wow.
So that was like 25% raise.
Wow.
And he said, when you come back, we'll get you a company car. Because you're going to need a car that you can, have two babies. I mean, so for all of his faults, he really did create a family environment. It got the front office got less fun when he was gone. It became more corporate, and I can only imagine now. It's mind-boggling. I never had a budget when I ran training camp or did all of the travel. My rule, they gave me two rules. If it's black or white, you make the call. If it's gray, you let somebody help. So, for staying in hotels, Jerry Burns would say, you can put us wherever you want if you think it's going to help us win. And you know how superstitious, if they won, they would go back. But now I'm guessing everything there's budget, and you've got to account for this, and there's got to be ROI, and we didn't have any of that. It was really, I'm sure, much more fun than it is today.
Oh yeah, and I know from a reporter's standpoint, being a beat writer, I could I could walk up the stairs and go to an assistant coach's office and just sit there and break down film with him.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And in fact, when Mike Lynn finally signed DJ Dozier, who had been a holdout, I just, I kind of had to sense something was up. I just kind of sat there until finally DJ Dozier walks in. And I go, okay, well, that makes sense. And Lynn's like, okay, you got the story. You can give us 10 minutes there, will you? I mean, it was just a bunch of characters who, and what's sad is, I'm guessing we'll be in agreement on this, is that Mike was a very good general manager in a lot of ways.
Yep.
He overreached on the Herschel deal, and it ended up tainting his reputation. He ran a good team. Burnsy ran a good team, and that was kind of the end.
Oh, we had some, there were some, the Pecos River trip.
Yes, I first got to town, and I heard, and I found out about the Pecos River trip, and and Mike's thing was, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk. Nobody talks about the Pecos River thing until we're back. And so I basically, my editor really wanted a story on the Pecos River, and I was trying to show Mike that I wasn't just going to put up with his bullshit. So I told him, I finally called him. I said, listen, I'm at the airport. I'm going to go down to New Mexico, and I'm going to go to Pecos River and bug the shit out of you people unless you give me something. Give me something I can take back to my editor and say, look, I tried, and this is as much as we're going to get no matter what we do. And he says, all right. And he always, that was the great thing about Mike, is everything was a fun negotiation.
Yeah. He was, he was smarter than people realized, and when that, it was kind of tough when the World League came, and he was kind of in New York and back in the office, but it was it was really tough to see him go, and just because there was a day where he brought there were three of us kind of doing PR communications, brought us all in, and he was like, I'm going to fire you. And we're like, okay. And he goes, whatever we were doing, we weren't doing well enough. But he said something that I've always remembered. He said, but if I fire you, he said, people succeed for two reasons. They need willingness and they need resources. And he said, if you fail, it's probably because of one of those two things. And he goes, I don't doubt that the three of you are willing, so I haven't given you he actually looked at himself. This was a big time. He was probably making $1 million a year at the time, and for him to A, not fire us, but B, kind of say, maybe I haven't given you the resource. What do you need? So we went in thinking we were getting fired, and then it's like, what do you need? And at the time he was in New York, we're like, we need you to be here more, or we need to have some more visit. Okay, done. And we walk out and we're still employed, but. It was sad when he died because, you're right. His legacy here in this town is always going to be Herschel, and he was a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And even players. There were players that really adored him. Randall McDaniel, I know, liked him. And then they would all tell you they hated negotiating with him. But after the fact, when it was done, and he was pretty good about never making it personal. You'd see him on some of our flights. He had a good time with players, and he was a trip. Miss him.
So when you transitioned from working for the Vikings to, I guess you would call it private sector work, how did that affect your viewpoint on sports, on the Vikings, on being a sports fan? Because I always wonder, if I got out of my business, if I wasn't paid to go to games anymore, whether that would increase my enthusiasm for sports, or whether I would just want time away from it all.
Well, actually, after I left, I went and got a master's in athletic administration, thinking that I would like to be a high school athletic director. I like sports. I thought I wanted to be a high school athletic director. Unfortunately, after I spent my first 2,000 on classes, I kind of learned the hard way that in Minnesota there's maybe a mostly unwritten rule that they're not going to give an admin job to someone who's not a licensed teacher, and that was going to be 2 more years of school. So, I love sports. It's in my bones or blood. I'm still a fan of all of the local teams and a lot of the national teams. But as I said, I don't mind having fall Sundays and being able to do go golf. Although I do help out.
Yep, as I always see in the press box.
Yeah, for half of the games I'm there helping now, and I do instant replay for the NFL for a couple games each year. So I'm still around it, but I think for sure, and going back wouldn't. It's like I've done it.
Yeah.
If you left, you'd probably, I don't want to go unless it was the New York Times or some.
I wouldn't want to work for the New York Times.
Okay.
Honestly, I would not want to change towns. I would not want to change newspapers. I would not. There's no job out there I think is so glamorous or big, and big is in quotation marks, that I would prefer to what I'm doing now. I always wanted to be a newspaper columnist. We have 4 sports plus the Big Ten in town. There's no place that has more than that, and so no, I don't, like, if the New York Times called me with a job, I can't imagine taking it.
Yeah.
Really, let's put it this way: the only jobs I would possibly consider leaving for at this point are jobs that I would never be offered.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to make me BS vice president of something for their company and pay me a lot of money, maybe I would just do it for the money, but I wouldn't ever apply for that job.
No, if I were ever to go back into the NFL, I always thought it would be fun to be at the Packers, just because they're so different than anywhere else. They're the only thing in town. That I think would be kind of fun. But here, Buffalo is a small market, but they still have the Sabres, and I think it would be cool to be at Green Bay just because this is it.
Yeah.
And they have a pretty good, rich history, and they've had some successful teams and successful coaches and engaging players, but that I actually did try to get a job there after the Viking job. One of our former interns at the Vikings was a PR director there, or assistant. Jeff Blum.
Jeff Blum, okay, yeah.
And he tried to help, but it didn't work out. But this is home for me, and I truthfully can't imagine leaving here. Unless maybe you say, like, somebody wanted to throw a lot of money my way, but
yeah,
I don't think that's going to happen.
I think we all have a price, but it's not really a realistic option or something I would ever, imagine happening. You said you do instant replay for the NFL. What do you mean by that?
So the instant replay, the NFL has 4 people in the instant replay booth on a Sunday. So there are 2 people who are in most cases, they're ex-league officials. So they're the 2 that are running the 2 monitors. Then there's a technician that, the local clubs will bring in, and then there's a 4th person, and in my case, that's me. So my job is really to keep a written play-by-play kind of on the go, so that in the event that the referee goes in and he has to go back, okay, it was 3rd and 10. I mean, I'm keeping, down distance. If I can get the time at the snap, the hash, yard line, for those instances where, like they've got to reverse the call. They need a quick way to kind of know where they're going back to. I'm also timing, so if a coach throws a challenge, I've got a stopwatch on the overall length of time that until he comes in and makes an announcement, so that they'll always say, well, that was 60 seconds. We both know that it's typically 2:45, 3 minutes of true time. The referee will meander, getting over to the in most, and then so as soon as he goes under the hood, then there's another clock that is also being timed. So that's where the referee has 60 seconds to make his decision. Most of the time, kind of before he even puts his head in the booth, you'll see he'll put on headphones. Our folks are going to tell him what they're going to show him. We've got 3 good camera angles, so the time that he's sauntered over, they're looking at all of the different line feeds. So if we don't see a good one, I've got a phone to the TV truck. Hey, do you have a low sideline shot that you can give us? I hate it when there's an actual replay, because ordinarily there's not much to do, but then it's just like this frenzy of Plus, all of the different folks have different ways of doing things. So some guys want me to shout out, right at the snap down, it's 1st and 10, line to gains the 30. Some people want me to be quiet, and so it's like you have to kind of know each of these different replay officials, their styles. In a lot of the cases, you'll see before he goes into what we think the outcome is going to be. The one that I can remember where we watched in the booth and none of us could, and I don't have a say in it, but none of us could, was the Favre to Greg Lewis.
Yeah.
Basically, we were all like, we're going to show you as many camera angles. Good luck. And I don't remember who the official was. He obviously called it in, and really their season changed from that point forward.
Oh, it did.
But it was
that was the moment we all realized Brett Favre was quarterback of the Vikings.
That there's some magic still left, but most of the time, by the time he's even gone in, it's been queued up and it's fairly obvious. You see the ball bounce,
right?
But again, it's a nice way to stay close to the game, unobstructed view. I'm not having to pay to get in. It's warm. I'll take that. And but I do some, and Colonel does. So we split.
Colonel Beeler.
Yeah.
And to summarize everything you just said, if Viking fans are ever unhappy with the replay, they should blame you.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Seriously, that's and now this year they've added New York into the mix. So my other responsibility is to be on a walkie-talkie with somebody down on the field who can actually, hold it up if they are lined up too quickly to kick an extra point. You'll see a guy in a teal shirt run out and grab an official, and they'll because New York has to look at it, authenticate it, confirm it. I did make a mistake this year where the replay official had given the thumbs up, and so I immediately said, confirm, and apparently that thumb up wasn't for me, or New York kind of chimed in, late and said hold, and we kind of had a little bit of a screw up, but more than anything, it's just a great way to stay close to the game and help out and make a few bucks.
Yeah. Do you have any good stories about either Bud Grant or Sid Hartman?
Yeah, well,
or the two of them combined?
Yeah, Bud scared me. I was when I started, I was a 22-year-old kid. I had a pierced ear, and he saw it and told me to take it out, and it never went back in. Ever. But I do remember there was a day. So Bud's routine at the end of practice was to blow the whistle, and everyone came around, and he would go over what the next day's schedule was going to be. And normally, either of my two PR bosses would be out there, and they would kind of saunter out and hang on the periphery and get the next day's schedule. This particular practice, there were like 4 fights, and he kind of lost his temper and ended practice early. And he blew the whistle, and Merrill or Colonel weren't out, and I kind of was on the sidelines, and I thought, do I go? And so I slowly meandered out, and I saw Bud eyeball me. And then the team all gathered around him. So now I'm like, he can't see me. And he takes his hat off, he wipes his brow, and he says, Dan, did you have something that you wanted to say to the team? And it was like, Moses parting the Red Sea. The whole team is now looking at me, and I'm sure I was I was red as your headphones, just I couldn't speak. And I stammered something to the effect of, it was just, want to find out tomorrow's schedule, and he just nods and says, why don't you go on back to the sidelines and I'll get that to you.
Wow.
And I know that was his way of kind of testing me, but I felt, and so then of course as the players are walking out to get out to go into the locker room, they're all patting me, hey, way to go, the other thing is that I always thought that he could he had eyes in the back of his head. Back down in training camp, we would have the 3 fields, and his rule was no smoking out there. And we would have Mike or the Skoglins would come, owners at the time would come down, and they'd smoke, they were smoking cigarettes in between fields. And my job was to, get them to put them out. But these were the owners or the general manager, and I could just feel Bud looking at me, and all he would have to do would be, just a slight little nod, and I would see, and I'd have to go over to one of the owners and say, hey, Bud would like you to put that cigarette. He was, talented in terms of, nothing got past him.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because one of the first podcasts I did at this site was with Mike Grant. I went and spent an hour with him in his office at Eden Prairie, and he started telling Bud stories. And one of the great stories was that Bud, after high school or after his service or whatever, didn't want to work. He wanted to go into the woods and hunt and fish and live off the land. He almost never became an athlete or a coach. He wanted to go be an outdoorsman and live that way. Just go live in a hut in the woods. But the other thing, when we talked football, Mike said, when you go to an Eden Prairie football practice, things look really loose. Players are joking around. The coaches are joking with players. Everybody's very relaxed. It's not a high-pressure environment. But then he said, but I do that all on purpose. Nothing happens on my practice field that I didn't plan. Nothing. I know exactly what it's supposed to look like. I know exactly what's going to happen. And I make sure it happens the way I want. And it made me think about Bud, because I'm sure Bud the same way. I'm sure his players weren't uptight and didn't feel like he was, always ready to jump down their throats, but things were going to happen the way he wanted them to.
Yeah, and I always thought his gift, I wrote about it in graduate school, was he empowered some of the players to be team leaders. He rarely spoke at a practice, rarely. He would blow the whistle, and they'd be moving to the different stations for the different drills. You wouldn't hear him until the end when he would get the team together. It was the assistant coach. So he had good coaches. Pete Carroll was one of Monty Kiffin were both there. Jerry Burns, John Mike. He had some really, really good coaches, but he let them coach. Les's year, he was a lot more vocal and was doing a lot more of the coach. Well, we see how that turned out. He was there for a year, and I just like the way Bud kind of, I think, whether he's ever said it, was, you get more powerful by giving power away, not by hoarding it. And he gave it away, and but also hearing some of his stories about some players, because I think, some of the people that I think you would think were some of his favorite weren't, and some who you would think, maybe they weren't, he really liked. So he was fun to be around. I really enjoyed when he wasn't coaching, and he's still, just getting to know him more as a person, because I was very fearful of him when I was a 22-year-old kid and he was the head coach.
Yeah. And the other thing Mike Grant told me about Bud was when Mike would be at the practices, he would notice if Bud saw something, let's say in the first 10 minutes of practice, let's say a player was sitting on his helmet or doing something that Bud just didn't approve of on the sideline. He said Bud would never react immediately, but by the end of practice, he would have kind of wandered over by that player and he said something very short and very subtle to the guy, and the problem would never recur. It was over with.
Yeah, I think the other thing one of the things that you would really, the only thing I ever saw him coach was how they would stand for the national anthem.
Yeah.
And if you remember they were always very disciplined. They actually practiced that in Mankato on the side, and I thought, wow, they got to practice how to stand. But then you'd see other teams where somebody has a helmet on.
Yeah.
So, they all helmet under and they practiced it, but it was other players teaching the young kids, here's how we do it here.
Right.
That was pretty cool.
Did you know Pete Carroll?
Yeah,
when he came
loved
through
him.
here?
Yeah, loved Pete. He was. My one Pete Carroll story is he got us to do a softball home run hitting contest one night in Mankato, I mean, it became this theatrical show. Players picked teams, and then they were betting on, which team and which individual. But it was just, like you see him now, very loose. The time for coaching was in the classroom and out on the field, but this was just something different to build some camaraderie, and it was cool. And if you remember the old DB Isaac Holt,
oh yeah,
he won it, and he wasn't the biggest guy, and I can't remember how many home runs he hit. I pitched, and then Pete pitched, but it was just. Really, we're going to have but players, they, that, as you know, that was back when camp was 5 weeks. They adored kind of a break from the routine.
Absolutely, yeah. And Pete's, I know he had the unfortunate ending of the Super Bowl that everybody will talk about, but yeah. He's a hell of a coach, and he's a hell of a guy.
What'd you think of the call?
I understand. I wrote about this too, and I was there. But, I get down after the game, and Pete's going, well, we were just going to waste that down. I'm thinking, what is he talking about? You're going to waste second and goal in the Super Bowl with the game on the line? And then I started thinking about it, and then I started talking to other players and other coaches and Bevel, and then I started thinking about how it transpired. And here's what I think happened. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. Butler tips the pass earlier, comes down, and I think curses hands. First down, so they're whatever. They're
first and down.
First down and goal at the 5.
Yeah.
And in that chaos after that play, they don't get the play call in quickly to Russell Wilson. So they have to burn their second timeout. So they're down to one timeout, first and goal at the 5. They run it on first down. Lynch gets inside the 1. And at that point, everybody in the building, everybody watching, I think, thinks Belichick's going to use one of his timeouts, stop the clock there, so if the Seahawks score, Brady has time to go kick a field goal. Everybody's thinking that.
Yeah,
all of a sudden,
I was at this, watching with some friends, screaming like, "Why
isn't he calling a timeout?
He's got to concede a score and save some clock."
We're all saying that.
Yeah.
And Belichick, being crazy and the crazy genius that he is over there going, "Screw that! I'm not calling timeout here. I'm going to make him score on me." And I think he's also thinking, they expect me to call a timeout, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, Carroll, who had planned on running the ball 4 times and getting it in the end zone, one of those 4 carries, is going, oh, shit.
Now if I don't make it.
If I run it here, and now that we're down to 30 seconds or whatever, if I run it here and don't score, I have to call a timeout.
Yeah.
And then I'm facing third down.
Where they know I have to throw.
They know I have to throw.
Yeah.
And now I'm throwing against Bill Belichick when Bill Belichick knows I'm throwing against him. I don't want to be caught in that situation. Yeah. And that's where Carroll goes, okay, screw it. We'll throw on second down. It'll either be a touchdown or incompletion, and then we can run it on third and fourth down if that's what we want to do.
It stops the clock if it's incomplete. Yeah.
Right. And I don't think they love Wilson so much, and Wilson's so reliable and so cautious with the ball. I don't think they think an interception is a possibility. Yeah. They worked on this play in practice. They think it's going to work. And then the randomness of the NFL comes in.
Yeah.
Brandon Browner pushes Curse back into the play. Butler, who I talked about at length after the game about this, said, we practiced against that. I got beat for a touchdown on Wednesday. Bill Belichick came over and said, now you know how to play it. Butler makes not only an incredible play to break it up, but an incredible catch.
Yeah.
That's a hard catch.
Yeah.
I mean, Wilson threw a perfect pass. Yeah. And Butler. So that's the crazy thing. So I think the second guess there, if you want to make a second guess, is there are safer pass patterns to call if you're going to throw it.
Yeah.
If you roll Wilson out, and it's not there, he's going to throw it in the stands. If you throw a fade to, one of your bigger receivers, those are hardly ever intercepted. It's probably incomplete or touchdown. I think if you're second and guess anything, it's just the exact kind of pass pattern.
Yeah, he threw
on the
it
goal line
into where the
traffic
most
is.
Bodies.
Right.
Well, and I've not seen a replay, but the only angle that I've really ever seen, he fakes to Lynch, and Lynch looks like he's going out. Was he covered? Because I half wonder.
I don't think he was.
Might he have been really open that would have been more of that safer throw that you're talking about than the one he did?
I think he would have been, but I think that's another one of the problems with the design of that play is you're going to throw it. It's like an anticipation play. So they just expect the receiver Lockett to be wide open on that play, because if they run it right, it's a pick play, and he is wide open. But Butler had seen it before, so he blew it up.
It was. I feel bad for Pete that. Because I didn't think it was the worst call. It was the worst result.
Yes.
But to me, it wasn't the worst call.
Right. Dan, any final thoughts? We've touched a lot of base. You got a favorite Sid story? One last story about a Viking figure you want to throw out there?
Not really.
Okay.
Not
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I appreciate you coming out. Thanks to Dan Endy, my guest, for spending an hour telling great old stories. My apologies to your father, Dan Endy, for not giving him more credit in terms of NFL films, but he should get more credit, and I will rectify that with a blog post here soon. Thank you to O'Gara's Bar and Grill, as always, for having us. We'll be back next Friday at O'Gara's, 5 o'clock, with a podcast. Then my band will play in the shanty, and then we'll have live karaoke in the shanty starting about 9. My band will play probably 7:30 to 8:45, something like that. Next Wednesday, 5 o'clock at Kieran's Irish Pub. For some reason, Irish pubs.
You like the Irish pubs?
I like Irish pubs, and they like me. I'll be doing a podcast 5 o'clock at Kieran's with a guest to be determined. And as always, thanks to the Alive and Social Network. Thanks to Sean Bernard. Thanks to Evan Davis for his work running the podcast. We'll be back with you soon. And please check out the archive. A lot of great conversations like this at SOUHAN-UNFILTERED.com. Talk to you soon.